The college football playoff for the 2025 season is set, and the 12-team field features 5 teams from the SEC, 3 from the Big Ten, 1 from the ACC, 1 from the Big 12, and 2 group of 5 teams. And it was not an easy, and it was a quite controversial decision by the committee. So Kyle, we are here with some instant reaction up at Athlon Sports. Let's get right into it, Kyle. What was your first reaction when you saw the 12-team field unveiled on Sunday?
I think this field makes sense. I don't know if we ended up there in the right way. Just the movement with Miami and Notre Dame in the last week with both of those teams idle. JMU, of course, over Duke as the 5th highest ranked conference champion. I think that was the correct move. But like you said, there were a lot of decisions still up in the air as we headed into Selection Sunday after a pretty chaotic conference championship weekend with some upsets. Of course, we see Indiana take down Ohio State. They earn the #1 seed. Not a lot of debate there, but the decision to not move Alabama down at all for that poor showing in the SEC championship against Georgia, BYU on the outside looking in, as well as Notre Dame, and we'll get into the Fighting Irish reaction to that snub here in a bit. But yeah, I think in the end, these are probably the 12 correct teams to be making the field. You could maybe quibble with the order and the path here, but I think the committee got the teams right, at least. Steven, do you agree with me there about the field?
Kyle, I think they got it right in the end. I think the process is beyond screwed up. And of course, we're going to dive into that in just a minute. But I think coming into the conference championship games, the big interest was obviously #1 versus 2, Indiana versus Ohio State. Who would get that #1 seed in the Big Ten championship game? Congrats to the Hoosiers on a big-time victory. Ohio State moves down to #2, and they, of course, will be followed up by Georgia at #3. So 2 and 3, pretty loaded side of the bracket. And then you get into #4, Texas Tech, who won the Big 12 championship. Those teams all have first-round byes. No complaints about that order. No real complaints about that next section of teams. With the exception being, I do think Texas A&M should be ahead of Ole Miss. Most of the season they were ahead. They lost to Texas. That dropped them behind Ole Miss. I do think as well the Lane Kiffin factor. Yes, it is the same team, but I do think Kiffin is worth a couple points on a field. I would have Ole Miss behind Texas A&M. So for the most part, I think the committee did a good job there. Now we get to the back end of the rankings. No complaints about getting James Madison in at 12, Tulane at 11. But the process of deciding the final couple spots. Alabama, I actually think is fine in the field, largely because they lost to a team that they already beat once this season. They lost to Georgia. They simply lost to them in the SEC championship game. It's a little different than BYU. I know a lot of people are outraged about BYU and why they fell. They played Texas Tech twice and got handled twice. It's a little different than the Alabama thing, so I'm okay with that. And of course, Oklahoma at 8. Those two teams played earlier this season, so we'll get a rematch in the first round. But I have a real problem with the end process to get to the fact that Miami jumped Notre Dame. If you thought that Miami was a better team than Notre Dame, you should have moved them 3 weeks ago or last week. I don't understand this idea that these two teams were idle. What was it, a bad week of practice in South Bend that caused them to drop a spot? I mean, what are we doing here? The whole process to get to this point makes no sense. I understand the head-to-head, and I am totally fine with that. Reasonable people can make reasonable arguments that Notre Dame is a better team now, and they deserve to be in. But there is no justification in the world that the committee should have made this switch when the two teams did not play, and there was not another reason outside of that. There was Boise State played Notre Dame earlier this year. They won the Mountain West Championship. That could have helped. That should have helped their resume. So I don't understand how two teams that had no action on the field should have been changed because they were next to each other in the rankings. To me, that is a complaint and a problem with the process. The playoff committee has several errors and things that they need to improve on going forward. But they got the indecision right. Everything else in between them is messed up, and there's absolutely no world where Notre Dame should have been moved down if they weren't behind Miami after the Week 14 games. Teams didn't play and they changed. That makes no sense. Am I crazy, Kyle?
No, I totally agree with your logic, Steven. I think that is a gripe that was raised by several Miami fans and just people who saw that Week 1 game, of Notre Dame's inclusion ahead of Miami was just kind of the incredulity of that position, and then to move it at after this conference championship week that like you said, we see, if anything, Notre Dame's resume got a little bit of a bump there with the Boise State win. I think the Irish are, of course, right to be upset, given that the nature of their resume, having just 2 losses to 2 college football playoff bound teams by a combined 4 points. Of course, Notre Dame is sort of lacking that signature win. They did beat USC. That really just, I guess, wasn't enough in the end, without a conference championship game to sort of give them an extra data point, or the Vanderbilt route, trying to play a 13th game to give the committee something else to see, last year's runner-up, and to see them get left out, and now Notre Dame with the news, the decision to essentially withdraw their name from a bowl game, kind of take your ball and and go somewhere else. Yeah, it was quite the selection Sunday, Stephen. The fallout, but like you said, I think the process of getting here is the issue. And I think that, kind of like the NCAA tournament in men's and women's basketball, maybe give a heads up of where things stand a few weeks before the actual bracket is revealed. And I think these weekly rankings, moving teams up and down, and kind of like how public that process is, kind of paints the committee into a corner. And then as Notre Dame and Miami moved closer and closer together, it gave justification with the head-to-head win and the same record to move Miami ahead on this week, where again neither team played. Maybe it was the bad week of practice, like you said.
Kyle, I think you're absolutely right when you say the process is messed up, but the indecision is fine. Like I would have had no problem either way if Notre Dame made the field. To me, the argument is they're just a better team. They rank higher than Miami in metrics. It's not a huge gap, but they're better. But Miami does have that head-to-head victory. Texas A&M has 2 very good losses. I know we don't want to get a discussion about good losses, bad losses. They're better than Miami's, of course, with Louisville and SMU. So the whole kind of thing to me goes back to like the previous week, because had Miami been ahead of Notre Dame, I don't think we're talking about like the crazy heartbreak. We're not seeing like Notre Dame pull out of a bowl game. I think it just gets at like, why the change? Nobody played. Why the change? And so to me, if you can't evaluate 2 teams that are, a couple weeks ago separated by 3 positions, I'm not sure you should be in the college football playoff committee, because to me, that is a flaw in the process. We should be able to evaluate these teams and have these big picture discussions weeks in advance, not when the 2 teams are close together. So, Kyle, by far, that is the most controversial decision. And, Florida State being left out for Alabama a few years ago, definitely these 2 decisions, I think, among the most controversial that we've seen in this 4-team and now 12-team playoff era. Let's kind of run through the bracket real quick. We kind of mentioned it. At the number 1 seed, of course, Indiana. Number 2, Ohio State, falling from number 1 to number 2 after losing the Big Ten championship game. Georgia takes number 3. Texas Tech at number 4 in the first round. And I think there are some interesting matchups, and we'll get some rematches and maybe some one-sided games. But at the number 5 spot, we will have Oregon hosting James Madison on December 20th. We will have Oklahoma and Alabama. That is the Friday night game. That is the 8-9 matchup, a rematch of a game we saw earlier this season. We have number 6, Ole Miss hosting Tulane. It's a rematch of a game that we saw earlier this season, 3:30 Eastern time, Saturday, December 20th. And then the final matchup, it's the first matchup on that Saturday, is number 7, Texas A&M hosting number 10, Miami. So Kyle, with all that in context, I'm curious to know which one of those matchups intrigues you the most, and maybe also thinking about the first round in the context of the bigger bracket, who's got maybe the most favorable path in terms of those higher seeds?
Yeah, of the 4 first-round matchups that you mentioned, I think the Miami A&M game is maybe most interesting to me. Of course, the JMU, Oregon, and Tulane, Ole Miss, both more than 2 touchdown spreads. Bama, Oklahoma is interesting. Of course, Oklahoma's gotten the best of Alabama a season ago, and this year the Tide are favored on their trip up to Norman, and I think that might be right. I think I'm going to be leaning with Alabama, even though it's kind of a slow end to the season for both of those teams. Just kind of limping into the playoff. I'm sure they'll enjoy having a couple weeks off to just kind of get right for the playoff. But yeah, that Miami A&M game, these are teams that we just spent all that time talking about Miami's inclusion, which ended up being right, by the committee, but still sort of controversial. Teams that played in the regular season, just a few years ago. So there's at least some recent history between these two teams. And my A&M, excuse me, just kind of sliding down the stretch, and I think Miami, after those midseason losses, maybe kind of hitting their stride, had the big Pitt win, and I think just rearing up to just have the opportunity to play it in the playoff. They thought that team last year, with Cam Ward, the eventual #1 pick, was going to have that opportunity, and now a year later with a quarterback in Carson Beck who has been on teams that have played for the college football playoffs, so just have some experience, there in the room heading into that matchup. As far as easiest path, I'm looking at the top half of the bracket. Going to go either Oregon or Texas Tech, in the 4-5. You want to be on the opposite side of the bracket of Ohio State and Georgia. As you mentioned, that's just not two teams that you want to play in the postseason in December and into January. Of course, Indiana, undefeated team, #1 seed in the bracket. No disrespect at all to the Hoosiers, who we'll share our predictions later, but I am bullish on Indiana's postseason hopes. But I do think that either Oregon playing James Madison, as a heavy favorite in the first round, or Texas Tech just kind of in that same slot and not having to play an extra game, having already played in the Big 12 championship. I'm looking at the top half of the bracket as the easier route to the national championship.
I agree with you. I think the bottom half of the bracket, where you have Ohio State and Georgia, seems pretty loaded to me. Obviously, it's down the road and they have to actually get there. But if Ohio State and Georgia plays in a semifinal, it has a big time national championship feel to it. So whoever's on the other side, that being Indiana, Texas Tech, and Oregon, feels like it's a little bit more favorable. Certainly Indiana being #1, they're going to be difficult to get through. But I think if I'm Oregon or Texas Tech, I like my chances a little bit better in that top half of the bracket as opposed to having to go through Georgia or Ohio State. It really feels like that's where you want to be. I think as far as intrigue in the first round, I think the team that I'm most interested in is Ole Miss, just because seeing what this team looks like without Lane Kiffin. They will have the offensive staff together. Charlie Weiss Jr. will call plays in this game. He's leaving to be the LSU offensive coordinator at the end of the season. And it's a rematch. It's a rematch of a game we already saw, and in a game where Ole Miss won handily the first time. So curious to see, same thing too with James Madison going up to Oregon. They're heavy underdogs. They have nothing to lose. What do they throw out there to maybe take a chance or two in a game where, hey, you're 17, 20 points, you got nothing to lose as the underdog here. So curious to see how the underdogs fare. But, Miami, Texas A&M, and this goes back to the bottom half of that bracket. I think Texas A&M is underseeded by a spot. Miami at 10 early in the season was, some people thought they could win the national championship. They have that kind of talent on the roster to where offensive line, defensive line, quarterback with big time experience. They're not a team I would want to see. So when you look at that bottom half of that bracket where you have Miami and Texas A&M at 7-10, it's kind of a shame that this game is 7-10 because it feels like the winner could maybe stack some wins together if they had the right situation. By far, I think the most intriguing of the first round games. You did mention Alabama and Oklahoma, and one of the things that I found fascinating about that game was if you look at the yardage in the first game, Alabama outgained Oklahoma by almost 200 yards. They just lost the big moments, like the turnovers. Oklahoma had a big special teams play. So while Oklahoma went on the road and won that game, it's like if I'm Alabama thinking we can get our offense going, yeah, it's a tough defense, but we really gave one away in Tuscaloosa last time. So curious to see how two offenses have been struggling in a game where there's probably not going to be a lot of points, how that one fares out, because that Oklahoma defense is going to be so tough at home. We talked about Tulane and Ole Miss as well. James Madison going up to Oregon. James Madison, Bob Chesney going to be the head coach at UCLA. Great defense for the Dukes, great rushing attack, very good at generating big plays. Do think they probably will have trouble holding up in the trenches against the Ducks. So that's a tough matchup. One of the reasons why they're a 20-point underdog. So, Kyle, I think as we kind of look past the decisions and we start to think ahead to the playoff and the future of this 12-team field, I'm curious to know what changes would you make, whether it be weekly rankings, process, anything? Would you expand it? I'm curious to see. I'm curious to know kind of what you think where this goes.
Yeah, I think my recommended change to the committee would be to go away from the weekly ranking shows. I think they're just painting themselves into a corner, every week. And like we said, it was kind of this controversy, but it was contrived controversy of setting yourself up for this, the head-to-head comparison that wasn't necessarily a head-to-head comparison a few weeks ago, even though these teams played, but being separated by 3 or 4 spots, so not necessarily whatever the term the committee used, a comparative pool, and then they ended up in the same comparative pool, and then you do want to go head-to-head. So I do think going away from the weekly ranking show would just kind of save everyone a lot of headache, and us in the media will continue to project the playoff and do rankings, and maybe just not having that weekly show would just kind of save everyone a little bit of heartache. And like you said, it wouldn't have maybe been this big travesty for Notre Dame to be left out if they weren't previously projected or said by the committee to be in the field. And I did want to note contractually the Notre Dame heading forward in the college football playoff saw that if they are ranked in the top 12, they will be slotted into the playoff. And so that essentially, if that were the case this season, the Irish would have been in the field. But that starts next year, not this season. That's going to be, I'm sure, not many years that the Irish are going to be ranked past 12 and really just right on that bubble this season. As far as expansion, I think I'd like to see another season or two of the 12-team playoff. I think even after last year, people, Boise State getting in, people are already ready for expansion. Hear talk of the 2014 playoff. If there is expansion, and it sounds like that is inevitable, I would go to the 5+11, 5 highest ranked conference champions like we had, and then 11 at-large bids. You'd think that one of those would end up going to Notre Dame again in most years. But I also think, there's last year we see a 3-loss Clemson team gets in the field. This year, a 3-loss Alabama team. You expand the playoff, they're going to be, on the bubble of that, what would be a 16-team playoff this year. You're talking about 2, maybe 3 3-loss teams, at least being in the conversation. That I think that goes more into, you hear conversation about the cheapening of the regular season. If you can lose three regular season games and still end up in the college football playoff, and it is also a question of when does the playoff expansion stop. So I do think maybe another year or 2 of 12, kind of see where things are, but I would not be surprised if expansion to 16 or even more happens sooner rather than later. What about you, Stephen? Do you want to see the rankings continue, or would you not be sad to see your Tuesday night open up?
Kyle, the rankings, as many people say about meetings, they could be emails. They don't need to be. We don't need to sit through 30 to 40 minutes of discussion, nor do we need them released on TV. We could simply just send them out. I do think in the big picture, you brought up something that's really important in all this, which is that there's no perfect system for this. College football is an imperfect sport. We have 136 teams going from Massachusetts all the way out to Honolulu, Hawaii, going down to Texas all the way up to Minnesota. There's different budgets, there's different hierarchies within the conference and in the sport. We're never going to find a perfect bracket. We're not going to be able to find a perfect conference game setup that keeps everybody happy. So I think we kind of have to start with that. And I think that kind of gets at this idea of like expansion. I hate the idea of going to like 24 teams and automatic qualifiers. I think if we do have to expand, and I think it will, I think 5+11 and 16 teams is the way to go. And I also think get away from having bowl sites serve as playoff games. Stay on the home campus up until the semifinals. Make the semifinals the national championship, be it neutral sites. Because that really incentivizes those top ranked seeds. Because as it is now, Indiana does not get a home playoff game. What an atmosphere it would be in a place like Bloomington, Texas Tech, or Lubbock to have a home playoff game. So I think that's a very simple change. And I think the playoff will expand largely because Notre Dame getting left out, Texas getting left out, Vanderbilt, one of its best seasons in school history, getting left out, probably says the committee's going to, or the playoff's going to expand in the future. I think there are some process things that have really bothered me since we've gone from 4 to 12 and even from BCS to this, which is you can't have a committee that operates in secret. The metrics for the basketball tournament are public. Why is it that we're supposed to just trust that Well, the analytics for Sports Source and all these other companies say this, and this, and it's not good enough. College football fans should be able to look at all that data, should be able to see the same things the committee has, and it should be all publicly available, because that can help us just kind of discuss these teams. We could be talking about Miami and Notre Dame and saying, look, these metrics are 100% similar, and the committee looks at head to head, and that's why they went with it. So you have a lack of transparency. You have a lack of transparency around the metrics. And I think those two things have to change. I think the public explanations of the rankings are a real problem. And I know the athletic directors and media and whoever's on this, they do the best they can. For the most part, they've gotten it right. But I do think their explanations are often very confusing, and they're a result of having to have weekly rankings. So maybe if you just do one ranking in November at the start, and then release the rest as just an email up until we get to the very end, they would have saved themselves a lot of heartbreak and a lot of, kind of back and forth over what to do with Notre Dame and Alabama and all this. Instead, maybe it adds a little bit more mystery to Selection Sunday. So I think there's some things that we could really clean up on the process front. Just do away with the rankings weekly. If they have to, make them just be releases. Back in the old days with the BCS, they just popped up on the site and you reacted to them appropriately. So I would go away with that. I would also go more transparency. Post all the metrics, let the public view them. And then if you can't, as an athletic director or whoever's on the committee, if you're not great at the explanations, that's not a problem. Let's just get somebody in there who can, whether that's a former player, a former coach, a media member, because I think it'll help. And instead of trying to, parse through words on a Tuesday night that make no sense, we can clean up those things, I think, and make a better process. So, Kyle, I think we're both in agreement that this thing probably expands to 16 sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think 16 makes sense. The 5+11 model, the 5 highest ranked conference champions. I don't think it's some travesty that there's a spot sort of, as they say, saved for the group of 5, even though it's not designated as that. And then this just kind of an odd season where we see 2 teams from the group of 5 and soon to go back to the group of 6, kind of end up as some of these highest ranked conference champions. The ACC, of course, ends up not being left out, getting Miami in at large, but of course at the cost of Notre Dame and Independent. So yeah, I think 16 sooner rather than later. So enjoy the 12 team while we have it.
Kyle, I think one thing that I hope college football fans keep in mind is that every season is going to be unique too. And it's the same thing with the playoff, is that there's no perfect system, but every year is going to be unique. I mean, you think about how this season played out, Miami not making the ACC championship game, but making it in the playoff because of that head-to-head win over Notre Dame. 8-5 Duke team won the ACC and beat Virginia, which knocked them out of the playoff. It's a very unique season, and we're going to have these, and we're going to have seasons where it's just very chalky and it's all just going to be very boring on Selection Sunday. So I think we have to keep in mind that there is no perfect system. No season is going to be like another. Over the next 10 years, we could get several different scenarios that could play out, and I think we'll see that, and it kind of creates some of this weird things that we saw this year, some of the things we've seen in the past. So I guess embrace uncertainty and embrace the chaos if you're a college football fan. But one thing is for sure, Kyle, the 12-team playoff is set. We got some fascinating first round matchups. I think once we get past the first round, those top 4 seeds come into play. It's going to be a fun bracket. It does feel kind of wide open, where maybe like 3 to 5 teams have a pretty good chance to win it. So stay tuned to Athlon Sports. We're going to be breaking down all the games. We're going to predict the games. We're going to predict the national championship and continue to follow all the developments on the 12-team, 16-team playoff and what happens in the future with the sport. So let us know in the comments what you think. Did the committee get it right? Notre Dame, Miami, should BYU, should Texas, Vanderbilt, should somebody else be in the field? Let us know in the comments, and check us out at Athlon Sports for the latest in the college football playoff and predictions.